Sheriff, I want to start by thanking you for your service as a law enforcement officer and in Congress. And I call you Sheriff when I pass by you because I always believe in calling people by their highest title. And as much as it is wonderful, and I'm sure the people in your family are proud of your service in the United States Congress, I am proudest of your willingness to sacrifice for the people of Washington as a sheriff.
Thank you.
Kevin Carper was a uniformed patrol officer with the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Department. He was not a detective. He was not in management. He was just a regular police officer like the ones we see every day in our towns and cities. And Kevin responded to a domestic violence call. Those who are unfamiliar with law enforcement have a tendency sometimes to refer to those as routine calls. There is nothing routine about a call, and everyone in law enforcement knows it. Off of Airport Road in Spartanburg, South Carolina, Kevin and his partner arrived to find William Seach on the front porch of his small home pointing a large caliber gun at his wife, Judy. Judy was crouched down in the front yard trying to protect herself, trying to shield herself behind a tree. And William was pointing the gun at her and alternatively pointing the gun at law enforcement who had just arrived on the scene. And you know, Sheriff Reichert, Mr. Speaker, it all seems so easy in hindsight. Do you shoot? Do you pull the trigger? Is the gun real? You have split seconds to make these decisions, only to have them second-guessed for months, if not years, afterward. Is the gun real? Is it loaded? William Seach finally turned the gun towards his wife, and he shot her, and as he was turning the gun towards law enforcement, no doubt to shoot them, they returned fire. And they struck William Seach, and as one officer ran towards his fallen wife, Judy, Kevin Carper ran to the front porch to make sure that William Seach didn't shoot anybody else. And as he got on the front porch, Mr. Speaker, he heard the cries of children. Unbeknownst to Kevin and his partner, there were children inside that mobile home, and the bullets from one of the officers' guns had struck one of the children. William Seach survived and was charged with murder. Both of the little girls ultimately survived, although one was badly, badly injured. And I met Kevin when we were preparing for trial. He was an essential witness. I needed to prepare for what would come during this trial. He would be second-guessed. His every move would be scrutinized. In a very real sense, he would not only be blamed for Judy Seach's murder, he would be blamed for shooting one of the little girls inside that home. And then he'd be blamed for not doing enough to protect Judy Seach, not making the right split-second decision. And I tried to prepare Kevin for what would be a grueling cross-examination. And it was clear to me his mind and heart were somewhere else. So finally I said, Kevin, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't have a choice. And he said, I know, Solicitor Gowdy. He had tears streaming down his face in my office. I know, Solicitor Gowdy, but I shot that little girl. Objectively, Kevin Carper did everything right that night. He responded to an incredibly tense domestic call. He was confronted with a man holding a gun. Was it a real gun? Was it loaded? All of these thoughts going through his mind. And as soon as William Seach shot and murdered his wife, he returned fire. Objectively, we know everything he did was right. But it didn't matter how many times I told Kevin, you did the right thing. Deputy Kevin Carper heard me. Father, husband Kevin Carper had tears streaming down his face at the thought that he would have hurt a child. Well, we went through the trial, and he was, as you might imagine, an indispensable witness. And, Mr. Speaker, he could not have done a better job in that murder trial. And yeah, he was a tough police officer in a uniform. But when it came time to describe walking on the front porch and hearing the cries of children. He became a husband and a father again. And in front of a jury, Sheriff, and you know this is hard for police to do, in front of a jury, this tough, brave man broke down in tears. And the jury had a chance to see the humanity of police officers. The jury had a chance to see that protect and serve and defend part of police officers. And he was convicted. William Seitz was convicted in no small part because of Kevin Carper's help. And in South Carolina, the sentencing takes place immediately after the trial. So there was family to talk to and to prepare them for the sentencing hearing so they could allocute on what Judy Seitz's life meant to them and what the proper punishment should be. And Mr. Speaker, Sheriff Reichert, I wanted to tell Kevin what a great job he had done. I wanted to tell Kevin how impressed I was with his humanity. I wanted to tell Kevin, I intended to tell Kevin that you took a cynical old prosecutor and you made him believe again that there are women and men who go into this line of work for all the right reasons. That's what I intended to tell him. But in the hustle and bustle of sentencing, he slipped out the back of the courtroom, and we went on with the sentencing hearing. But I knew that I would see him again, and I would have a chance to tell him. I'd have a chance to tell his boss, you need to watch that guy, make him a homicide detective. He's really good. I'd have a chance to tell him he did great by those little girls. I knew I'd see him again and I'd have a chance to tell him again. And I did see him again. Laying aside a roadside. Shot to death during a routine traffic stop. He was shot by a man who had been arrested more than 30 times. If you've ever attended an officer's funeral, the finality of that death hits you the very hardest at the end, where they do the radio call. Deputy Kevin Carper, do you read? Deputy Kevin Carper, can you hear us? And of course, there's silence. And then at the end, it's Deputy Kevin Carper, you are clear to go home. I never told Kevin what I should have told him. Deputy Kevin Carper, you were a credit to law enforcement. Husband, father, Kevin Carper, you're a credit to humanity and your family. I wish I had told you when I should have told you. And I hope that all of my other friends in prosecution and in law enforcement now will not wait too long to tell the men and women of law enforcement how grateful they are for their service. With that, I would yield back.
See you this evening, Congressman Gowdy. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to get your thoughts on this breaking news first, and then we'll get to some of that. What's your reaction to this story in the Times?
Well, I've been in a classified skiff with Director Pompeo for the last 2 hours, Martha, so I'm catching up a little bit. I read the story. Obviously, I want to see the memo. Obviously, I want to talk to Director Comey to determine how contemporaneous his recording of the conversation was, but also importantly, not just what was said, but what did Director Comey hear? How did he take it? And that can only be done, with all due respect to the New York Times, that can only be done by looking at the memo and talking to Director Comey.
Yeah. New York Times, in this report, does not have the memo in their hands. It was read to them over the phone. So that in and of itself, you know, as you point out, it's very difficult to get the context if you can't read the whole thing.
Well, if you go back to criminal procedure, which is my background, there's a doctrine called the rule of completeness. Whenever part of a document is introduced, you got to be able to look at the entire document. Your viewers and my fellow citizens deserve to see the entire context of whatever conversation may or may not have taken place. And quite frankly, Director Comey deserves an opportunity to come tell us how he heard it, what he heard, how pervasive it was, and how much of the conversation that segment consumed. So we have a story. There's a reason newspaper articles are not admissible in any courtroom in the United States. I'm not knocking the reporter. The reporter does good work. But we're a long ways from a conviction, the fact that we simply have a headline in the New York Times.
So in terms of the, calls for a special prosecutor, an independent prosecutor, this is going to only fuel those. Do you think there's any reason to go that route at this point?
I have been resistant in the past, but I've been open-minded. Special counsel is only appropriate if there's an allegation of a crime, and there are several crimes potentially at play here. The hacking of the DNC is a crime. I don't hear people talking about that much. The dissemination of classified information is a crime. General Flynn's comments to the FBI may or may not constitute a false statement to a law enforcement official. And I've heard allegations that this rises to the level of obstruction of justice. So you do have a sufficient evidentiary basis for a crime. But the other half of the equation is whether or not the Department of Justice or any of the 94 U.S. attorneys can do the job themselves. And I have not been persuaded that all 94 U.S. attorneys in our country, many of whom are women and men who have nothing to do with politics, are incapable of fairly adjudicating this fact pattern.
All right, one last question on this, then I want to get to the next subject with you. If James Comey believed that what the president said to him was an effort to obstruct justice, to get him to table this investigation of Mike Flynn, would he be obligated to let the Department of Justice know right away?
I don't think so. I'm probably in a minority here. I don't think Director Comey reported President Obama the 4 different times he prejudged the outcome of an investigation. And there were 4 different times. Director Comey has not been afraid in the past to say no to presidents and attorney generals. He did it when he was with the Department of Justice. I think this was an effort to influence him. He knows exactly what to do, but I won't know that until I have a chance to ask him.
All right. The thing we're left with still in all of this is an empty seat at the head of the FBI, and your name was on that short list. You asked for it to be taken off. Why? Why do you think you're not the right person for that job?
I think the country can do better than me, quite frankly. I did have 20 years in a courtroom, Martha. That's the best job I've ever had. But the reality is, in this current political environment, I am known more for being asked to chair one committee than I am the 20 years I spent in a courtroom. And my first rule of friendship is don't ask friends to do things that are not in their best interest. And the Senate confirmation process would be dreadful and it'd be miserable. And quite frankly, I think the country deserves a woman or a man who is devoid of political taint. And whether I like it or not, should offer or not, I have been in politics for 6 years. I think I could be fair, but I don't know that I could get the job, and I don't know that I could convince a sufficient number of my fellow citizens that I would be fair. And quite frankly, they deserve an FBI director that is above reproach.
We're just learning that Jason Chaffetz the congressman is saying that he has a subpoena pen hanging over this memo, and he would like to see it. Any reaction to that?
I don't know that he would have to subpoena it. I thought he was recuperating from surgery. I'm glad he's doing better. And he found a subpoena pen. I don't know that you would need to subpoena this memo. If it was read to the New York Times, I would certainly hope the FBI would read it to members of Congress. So hopefully it doesn't come to that.
I want to go back a little further in the Jim Comey story. You put out a statement when he was fired saying that he had a very tough job and access to the facts that perhaps the rest of us did not, is the way that you put it. A lot of people have said that his performance on July 5th, when he came out and said, we have all this evidence, extreme carelessness on the part of Hillary Clinton, and yet we are not going to prosecute her. Was that news conference enough in and of itself to let him go, do you think?
No, and I think when history knows the full fact pattern that led Director Comey to have that July news conference, I think what your viewers know is a meeting on the tarmac between the spouse of a suspect, or the target of an investigation, the Attorney General. What your viewers don't know, Martha, and what Jim Comey frankly can't tell them because it's classified, and I can't tell them because it's classified, There were a lot of other reasons that Jim Comey decided to take that decision upon himself. And I think history, and I've had plenty of differences with Jim Comey. I want to be really clear about that, lots of them. But I think history is going to be much kinder to Jim Comey in that July press conference than the Democrats were when he had it. I think he had access to information that, because he is a stand-up guy and he's not going to disseminate classified information, although God knows everybody else is, he's not going to do it, even if it casts him in a negative light. So all your viewers see is this meeting on the tarmac. Jim Comey had access to additional information that I am convinced left him with no other choice than to make the decision he made in July.
So you're saying he had no choice? There was pressure on him to not prosecute Hillary Clinton? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I think he had access to information, and he wanted to safeguard the integrity of the investigation and the integrity of the process. And I probably ought to just leave it right there. But no, I'm not talking about pressure. I don't think the guy feels pressure. I think he wanted the public to have confidence in the investigation and the outcome. Even though I disagreed with the outcome, he wanted you to have confidence in the process. He had access to information that your viewers don't have, and they may not ever have because it is classified. But trust me when I tell you this, Martha, I know what it was. And I have been a critic of Jim Comey in the past. But he made the only decision he could have made with respect to appropriating that decision away from the Department of Justice and making the decision himself. And history will be a hell of a lot kinder to him than the Democrats were at the time.
I only take away from that you're suggesting that there were more entanglements between the Clintons and perhaps the Justice Department than everyone understands.
You're very perceptive.
Okay. Thank you. Trey Gowdy.
Yes, ma'am.
Always good to see you, sir. We'll dig for more on that later. Good to see you, sir.
Yes,